to another episode of The Amanda Hill Show. Hello everybody. Welcome back to all of my regular listeners, and a very warm welcome to anybody who maybe today is your first episode of The Amanda Hill Show. Welcome along for the ride. We are in for such a treat today because I have an interview ready for your ears and your hearts and your wombs with the amazing Claire Baker. Those of you who are regulars on the podcast, you will have noticed that this year there's been a shift with more host-only episodes, so more episodes of me just sharing. So I'm very selective about the guests I have on the show, and could not be more thrilled with this guest. If you've been following my work for some time, you will have known that Claire has had such a huge impact on my life, on my business, through her incredible work. And I guess I wanted to start with, a little bit about how her work came into my life. I actually remember seeing for many years Claire's name, float around on the net, on the gram, and it was one of those things, like I'd sort of see her pop up and I was like, oh yeah, she does the menstrual cycle work. But it wasn't until the start of 2017, actually, I remember so clearly, I got my period, so it's just another period, and I was on day one and I had the day off, and I was like, I'm going to download that ebook of Claire Baker's, and I just downloaded it, and I was absolutely fascinated with this menstrual cycle awareness work. And the reason I wanted to mention that is because our own sense of timing is so important. I just think there's such a potency when we come into a new area of exploration with such an intuitive sense of like, this is the timing for me. There's so much exploration out there, and sometimes we can feel a sense of like, oh, I should have already done that, or I should do that work. For me, I've noticed such a potency when we can allow ourselves to come into that work if and when it's right for us. So yeah, a little powerful reminder there. A few months after reading Adore Your Cycle, I actually did 3 months of coaching with Claire, and then the year after, I was absolutely honoured to be invited to assist her at her Cycle Love Retreat in Daylesford. And this was last year. I can honestly say it was one of the most deeply profound experiences of my life, sitting in circle with an intimate group of women for 4 days. It was just lush. There's no other word for it. I always knew I wanted to have Claire on the podcast, but I actually wanted to wait until after we'd had that beautiful time together on the retreat. And I also knew I wanted to speak to her about a unique topic because she's done many interviews, and I'll link to some of them in the show notes if you're interested in checking them out. But I wanted to bring a new aspect to this conversation and really focusing in on partners and periods. So yeah, special welcome to, and a props as well actually, to any of the partners who are, either willingly or unwillingly listening into this ep today. Thank you so much for doing this work alongside us. Also, episode number 8 of The Amanda Hill Show, there is a conversation around me sharing my experience with adoring my cycle, where I go into much more detail around why I chose to come off other forms of contraceptive and embrace my natural cycles. So please head there if you want more info on that front. The other question that I know will be coming is around natural contraceptive options. So in the show notes and the resources, I've popped some blog posts and podcasts from Dr. Nat Kringudis. She's a doctor of Chinese medicine. She's incredibly knowledgeable in this area. So please, if that's a concern or a curiosity for you, please head there for more info specifically on that topic. So Claire, she is a women's coach. She's based in London. She focuses on the intersection of life coaching and menstrual cycle awareness. So she teaches women how to sync their lives with their menstrual cycle, and she actually believes that this is the missing key in women's well-being. So I am actually just feeling so proud of this episode, and just so pleased that conversations like this are becoming more and more mainstream and more accessible. And I'm just feeling, so happy that my podcast has a small part in making these conversations more accessible, because they're so deeply healing to us, to generations to come, to generations before. So it's just such important work. So if you are also passionate about allowing this work and this knowledge to be accessible to more and more people, please, I'll ask you to share this episode with at least one other person you know might benefit as well. And if you want to spread it further and are on the gram, if you share it in your stories, please tag both Claire and I. My handle is @amanda._hill and Claire's is _ClaireBaker_. All right, let's do this. So the biggest, warmest welcome to the one and only Miss Claire Baker. Thank you so much for your time and your wisdom today. Thanks for being part of the Amanda Hill Show, and welcome.
I'm so happy to be here. Finally, thank you, babe. I'm thrilled.
Yay. It's just the best to have this time together. Our first question that we always start with on the show is, what are you currently frothing?
Oh, do you know what? I am so obsessed with my garden right now. I never really used to get gardening. I really didn't understand why. I guess I could appreciate the natural side of things and being in nature and the elements and all of that. And only the last few months have I really experienced the true joy that comes from gardening and being in the dirt and the smells and seeing something grow from a seed and nurturing it. And it's been really exciting actually to I guess, to have a space of my own to play in and to create and to design a garden and to decide what goes where and which colors and why that plant has meaning and learn more about nature and how it works. It's so cool. It's incredible to me. And the cycles, that appeals to me in my work so much. And seeing, for example, it's spring here in London right now, and seeing the blossoms on the grapevine, not the blossoms, the buds, the green buds on the grapevine that has looked like it's just been dead all winter, start to, the dark brown branches are peeling back and the lime green shoots are coming through, and just it's so incredible to me to see it, really intimately in action before. And I observe nature in my surroundings all of the time, and it has definitely informed my work on the menstrual cycle by just paying more attention to the seasons. But I think being like actively involved in the like planting and regeneration and observing the blossoming of my garden these last months has really blown my mind, actually. So that's what I'm currently frothing on, is gardening.
I love it. I love it so much. And so many parallels. I can just imagine you in the garden linking things with your work. This is so much to do with the winter and, the seed. What I'm wondering, as you were sharing, was there something in particular that made you go, I'm getting out in the garden?
It's been, for me, a way to ground two things. One, a way to ground myself here in England. I feel, and I have felt like I need to feel more of a sense of like a base, and it's very far away from Australia, and even though I love it here and this is home right now, I've just had this like sense of like needing to earth and ground, and I'm like, we've got this garden, like maybe that's going to be the way to do it. I've also been, probably a few things actually. I've also been navigating low thyroid function for the last 9 months or so, and when I'm at my most exhausted when I'm having like a real moment of like I'm absolutely exhausted from this, all I want to do is crawl into the earth. It's just like this, like, I just want to crawl into the earth and just sleep forever. There's just been like a real calling back into the soil for some time now, actually. And then the third thing I would say is that it's been really lovely to do it with Alex, my partner. That's something that we've been doing together, is getting out in the garden and gardening together. And he was the one who was like, let's get out there. We've got to plant these things. Let's do it. And I'm thinking, yeah, fine, cool. I mean, happy to do it together. But I guess he was the one that really prompted me to do it. So yeah, that's what's called me out into the back garden.
I love it. And you're someone who, in the time I've spent with you, I've noticed there's always a great deal of meaning, which is why I asked what the intention was around it. So, yeah, you've delivered threefold meaning.
I know. It can never just be simple, like surface level, really. It's always, yeah.
The deeper, the better. So talking cycles, this menstrual cycle awareness, it's really become the cornerstone of your life and your business as well. So for our listeners today, what led you to this, and what is it that you do in the world today?
So I was on the contraceptive pill for 10 years. I took it from about 15 or 16 up until about 26. And I had a fine time on being on hormonal contraception. I had really no issues with it while I was on it. And then I guess I went through what I would call my quarter life crisis. I was feeling dissatisfied in my work and definitely in relationships, and I wasn't being creative. I wasn't taking time to connect with myself. I wasn't really doing things that I enjoyed. I was 25 and just feeling a bit meh about stuff, and just unsure about where my life was going and all of that. I think so many of us, at some point in our 20s will experience that. It's just a lot of questioning. I guess some people would consider it like a Saturn returns time,
Yeah.
of making lots of changes. And some of those changes for me included practicing yoga, like starting to learn yoga, and journaling again, and signing up for like craft courses, and moving. I left Melbourne and I moved to Perth in Western Australia, and just I started blogging. I started training to be a coach, and it was within a really short period of time that I made all of these changes. And one of them was to decide to come off the contraceptive pill. And I came off it and nothing happened. So for this entire year after I stopped taking hormonal contraception, my period didn't return at all. So I didn't bleed for a year. And in that year, I really freaked out, it scared me a lot. I just couldn't believe that I really felt like I had just taken this pill so unconsciously for so long without really knowing what it was doing. I mean, I was trying to I just went on this deep dive into understanding the menstrual cycle and what it was I was even waiting to return. I mean, I knew that my period hadn't come back, but I didn't understand that for the last 10 years I had been suppressing ovulation. So I was also learning, like, okay, well, what's ovulation, and how will I know when it's happening, and what is this? So I'm 26 and learning about my body in such a profound way for the first time ever. And just became fascinated by it. And once my period did return, I was really ready to go when it came to charting. I was armed with all of this information that I had devoured, and excited. I was so excited and thrilled to begin to pay attention to what was happening in my body. And so I really went for it. I learned how to chart. I learned how to figure out what was going on with my cycle, and became fascinated by the way that my body changed so much week to week. And, when you're on the contraceptive pill, and they're all really different, but generally your experience is that you have 1 week where you have your period or a withdrawal bleed, where you're not taking any hormones and there's this drop in hormones. And then for the rest of the time that you're taking the pill, your hormonal levels are about the same. So you sort of have this very linear experience. And then off the pill, it's very different. Natural menstrual cycle ebbs and flows, and I could really feel that, like physically in my body. I could feel the way my energy changed, the way my libido changed, the way my physical shape changed, my hair, my skin, mentally. I realized it affected the quality of the thoughts I was having, affected how I felt emotionally, my spiritual connection to myself, creatively. Like, everything changed so much, and I recognized that there were patterns. As I went on cycle by cycle by cycle, I realized there were patterns in how I was feeling. And so at this time I was beginning to work with clients as a health and life coach, and working with women primarily. And naturally, the conversations would begin to turn to the menstrual cycle. So when somebody was telling me that they felt frustrated because their goal was to exercise more, right? And then they found there were some weeks where they could, very easily get to the gym or to yoga, and they felt really strong and resilient and really happy to be moving their bodies. And then the next week they felt more tired or less motivated. And I'd start to ask the question, well, like, where are you in your menstrual cycle? Because what I'm noticing is X, Y, Z. And so these, naturally the conversation started to be, well, what day of your cycle are you on today? And maybe that self-doubt that you're feeling about your work or your relationship, like, let's start to chart when that's coming up and when you're noticing it more. And it really began from there. And so that's really what I do still now, is and this is, over the last 6 or 7 years has evolved, but I help women better understand their menstrual cycle and how to chart and how to make these observations and how to recognize their own strengths and vulnerabilities in each phase of the menstrual cycle so that they can flow with their own natural rhythm and feel empowered by their cycle and feel empowered by this ebb and flow rather than feel like they're at war with their body or, frustrated by the hormones or really at a loss, as to what's going on. Because when we don't have an awareness and we can feel this like back and forth, this ebb and flow, this up and down, that's really hard, that's really exhausting and it is disempowering. So my work is helping women to, one, recognize that they have a menstrual cycle and this is what's going on, and two, recognize like where their strengths and vulnerabilities are, and then three, work their cycle so that it's serving them, so that they're not at war with it anymore.
Amazing. I still remember when I first downloaded Adore Your Cycle. I was actually on day 1 of a bleed and I gobbled it up in one go. I didn't take my eyes off it. And with what you're explaining here, I found for me there was such an understanding. Like as I was reading, I was like, yes, I know this. And so do you find like when you're working with women, it's this remembering and reclaiming because it's already there, but there's just been a disconnection with it.
It's exactly how it feels, isn't it? That it's like a remembering. And I think this is why this work is actually so fruitful very quickly. It doesn't take long to feel it and to see it and to make these connections and to recognize these patterns, because it's like, yeah, I do know this. I hear that very, very frequently from women. I mean, it's been our own experience as individuals in this lifetime, but it's also, that rhythm is passed down generationally. It's ancestral as well. I mean, we were inside our grandmother's womb, right? The way that the ovaries and the eggs work. We feel the echo down the line, and we know this. It's the rhythm of within ourselves. It's also the rhythm of the planet, as I said earlier. Like how much the seasons of the year have taught me so much with this work. And this might all sound like a bit woo-woo or like a bit esoteric, that we feel the rhythm of the year, but we know the seasons, and it makes sense to people. We know what winter feels like, we know what summer feels like, and we can differentiate between the two. So when you start to feel it within yourself, it's like, I know this is familiar, this is deeply familiar to me, and it's also deeply comforting. It's like, I know this. I know how this works. I know what to expect now. And it is like a remembering. I love that.
And you mentioned here with the seasons that it's easy to recognize that because we go through the seasons in one year. It's a very physical, tangible thing. And because this conversation, I wanted to bring in the discussion around partners, because I'm with a partner who's male, who doesn't have a menstrual cycle. It then comes to the communication around the period and what I'm experiencing on a whole month sort of basis. And what I found to be so helpful was the seasons, because that's something that he also understands and can easily go, oh yes, winter, that's the time for rest within. And so we know that us as women go through the changes over a monthly period. What about with men? Is there anything you could tell us about, because men also move through a cycle, but it's different to us as women?
Yeah, it is really different to us, and we're all cyclic beings. I mean, as you just said, we're all moving through the cycle of the year. Um, we all have a circadian rhythm, so every day we're moving through the cycle of the day, and we can use that. Again, it's the exact same cycle as the inhale and the exhale of the day, just as there is in the menstrual cycle and in the year. There's a time for rest and there's a time for being out in the world. So yeah, the male body certainly has those cycles. Their hormonal cycle is certainly more linear than ours if we were to look at it on a monthly basis. So every day their hormone levels, testosterone being the primary sex hormone for men, is around about the same every day, whereas ours change really not only week by week, day to day, but literally hour by hour. Our hormones are changing. It's like we're just not static, and neither is the male body. But what's happening in the male cycle is that they'll have an increase in testosterone earlier on in the day. So they'll have a boost in testosterone in the morning. It'll then sort of peak, I guess, around lunchtime, and it'll begin to wane down and decline in the afternoon and the evening, and then it kicks off again to then as they're resting. So it's more in line with their circadian rhythm, their testosterone cycle. And I've heard people say, men go through the same cycle that women do in a month in one day. And, it's not really the case, but they do have this ebb and flow in one day, their testosterone cycle. And that basically repeats itself every day. So we are experiencing a very different hormonal landscape, the female and male body.
And on that note, might just move into in partnership, what your biggest tips are for communicating about your cycle to a partner.
Yeah, I want to underline what you said, Mandy, about the seasons. To very just quickly I know that you'll link elsewhere where people can learn more about the seasons in more depth, but the idea that menstruation...
we may also have some partners listening in to this conversation as well, so that's great.
Cool. Yeah, great. That's good to think about.
And welcome.
Okay, so totally. So if we look at the seasons of the year, we have winter, spring, summer, and autumn, and those same seasons can be applied to the four of the phases of the menstrual cycle. So if we think about menstruation, having your period when you're bleeding being like the winter, as you were saying earlier, it's the time for chilling out. We're often indoors. We're just, happy to be a little less sociable often. It's more of a quieter, more reflective time. Definitely a time for rest. And as I said, when I look into my garden, everything looks dead in winter. And it's not. It's not, but it's resting. And that's really, the same for us. We then have spring, and talking about spring, if I look outside right now, like there's blossoms on the trees, the days are longer and lighter. There is this drawing back out into the world, and that's how it can often feel in that pre-ovulation. So that phase after menstruation, but before ovulation, we have this again, like the inhale, we're inhaling, we're coming out, we're leaving the period cave and stepping back out into the world. And that takes us up to the summer. So that's a great way to describe ovulation, is this really fertile, abundant, beautiful time of year where often we do want to be out in the sun. When it's summer, we want to be with people that we love. And it's often the same for those who ovulate. There is this feeling of wanting to connect, whether that's just with friends or whether that's with a romantic partner, sexually. There's even just networking. There's this feeling of just really wanting to be with people. And that's our lovely summer phase. And then we move into the autumn, and the autumn phase is like the trees letting go of the leaves and the days becoming shorter and cooler, and again transitioning back down to winter. is what our body is doing in that premenstrual week as well. So in that premenstrual week, where we're slowing down, hormones are beginning to decline in the lead up to menstruation, and I really believe that that explanation of the seasons is so helpful to explain to anybody who doesn't have a menstrual cycle, because we know how those seasons feel, and you can say, hey, I'm in my autumn right now, that's why I am actually feeling just a bit more reflective, I might want to spend some time on my own, or could I get a bit more support, or just to be able to ask for what you need, being able to say to somebody, like, I'm in my autumn, like, oh yeah, autumn, that is a slower time, a more chilled out time. I'm not in my summer anymore. I was in my summer last week and I'll be back in my summer again in a few weeks, but I'm in my autumn. And it's not a way to ever make excuses. I think that I don't ever want the cycle to be a reason why we, what am I trying to say? Like abandon ourselves or abandon those that we love, or use it as an excuse, or blame it. I think that's what I'm trying to say. Like using the cycle, I'm blaming my hormones. It's a way of understanding where you are and being able to communicate that in a way to somebody else in language that they can understand. Because if we say, oh, I'm on day 25, that might not really mean anything to somebody else who doesn't have a menstrual cycle, or even I'm in my premenstrual week, or progesterone's declining. Like, this is why I feel like this. The seasons is such a brilliant way. So I've always recommend using the seasons to begin to communicate that, and walking somebody through it. Most people I know who don't have a menstrual cycle are thrilled to learn this information, particularly those who are in a relationship with somebody who does have a menstrual cycle, because this is gold. This is juicy, juicy insight, and it's for the betterment of everybody in a relationship, right? And even if you have a menstrual cycle and so does your partner, and they don't know this information, like, how fabulous to be able to share that together. So I just think, whether we do or we don't, it's so important to know this, because we all have people in our lives who do have a menstrual cycle, whether that's in a romantic relationship or otherwise. But yeah, I do really think the seasons are a great place to start.
Yeah. Great. And what I'm hearing here as well, when you were mentioning about the blame, and we spoke earlier about that reclaiming and empowering ourselves, what's your take on, I just get a sense with this work, it's like, and I've witnessed in myself of, first learning about it and then almost wanting to really perfect it, and then coming into more of a stage of integration, and almost letting myself and other people off the hook around it if it's not the perfect cycle, or if the communication wasn't perfect, or whatever it is. Because I think that's almost it's like a road that we can choose to go down with any new information that we learn, is that trying to, and you've spoken about it a bit in your way of like trying to have the perfect cycle, or trying to have the perfect communication.
Yes, the perfecting of the cycle. It comes as no surprise, I think, that when we learn anything new, and as women, we have spent most of our lives probably trying to fit ourselves into various boxes, and certainly when it comes to our bodies, trying to adhere to standards that we've set for ourselves, that we feel that have been set for us. And so, yeah, what I often see is, and I have experienced this as well, is learning this information and then going, right, so spring is meant to feel like this and summer is meant to feel like this. And then when it doesn't, criticizing, this inner criticizing then, or like, why don't I feel like that? Or comparison, or that person's cycle is like this, and why is mine only 25 days and it should be 28, and I've had a longer cycle and there's something wrong. And
or like life not lining up with your cycle, like
Yeah,
looking at a weekend and going, okay, I've got 2 days free there. It'd be great if it could arrive on like the Friday
oh,
night, and then waiting all
absolutely.
weekend, going back to work on Monday, getting the period,
Mm-hmm,
things like that.
mm-hmm,
Yeah,
mm-hmm,
that can put a
mm-hmm,
real
mm-hmm.
spanner in the works.
Oh my gosh. I think one of the questions I get asked so often is my wedding's coming up and I'm meant to have my
Oh,
and I'm due to have my period. How can I change it? Oh, I'm sorry. There's yeah, this work forces us like while we can look for patterns and yes, we can learn the rhythm of the cycle. Ultimately, we don't control our body, right? We can't blink and we ovulate. We don't get to choose when our period comes. And certainly there are things that we can do that can help to restore that inner ecology and create more regularity, and we can begin to notice what's going on so that we have a bit more of an idea about what's happening. But ultimately, we don't get to decide when we bleed. And so yeah, it's massive surrender, right? And being able to be flexible within that. And often I'm asked if I have a short or longer cycle, is there any point in me tracking because it's so irregular? And actually, I think it's even more important to track when our cycles are a bit irregular or where, yeah, they're not as predictable, because the more we learn about what's going on, then we can kind of feel what's happening. But ultimately, there will definitely be moments where you think, brilliant, I'm going to have my period this weekend. I'm going to have this gorgeous period retreat. And it doesn't come. And so then there's like a trusting, okay, like my body knows what it's doing. I'm just going to trust that this is exactly how it is meant to be. And I was, how lovely. I had those couple of days of rest on my last days of my cycle. And now here I am at work. How can I take care of myself accordingly on day one? What can I do? Like, this is like, it's that acceptance. It's like, okay, this is where I am. Surrender to that. Now what can I do today to take care of myself, rather than becoming frustrated or creating more resistance by wishing it could be different. Yeah, it is. It's just a constant practice in letting go and trusting, having a menstrual cycle and paying attention to it. It really is.
And surrendering.
Mm.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. So for the men and women as well, like listening, who have a partner with a menstrual cycle, how can they best support their woman? Or do you see this as like primarily the woman with the menstrual cycle, her self-care being number one?
Yeah, number one, it has to come from within. It has to come from within. It is our responsibility to practice menstrual cycle awareness and to get to know our own inner seasons, to get to know where those strengths and vulnerabilities lie. And yeah, you mentioned communicate clearly earlier. I didn't quite get back to that. It's funny that you asked that. This is something I'm actually trying to practice within myself at the moment, is actually giving myself permission to not always communicate clearly, because that's something that I think holds me back from just saying the thing. So often I think that my advice would have been, to communicate clearly. And for some people, actually, that will be important, is to learn how to communicate this information clearly. But actually what I'm trying to give myself permission to do currently in my personal life is to just start and to just say what needs to be said, particularly when there are emotions involved. And often when it comes to the menstrual cycle, there are a lot of feelings, there are a lot of emotions, and to recognize that it is a little bit messy and that that's okay. And this is very much my own personal practice right now, is recognizing that it's okay if I try to communicate how I need to be loved in my in my winter when I'm bleeding, and it doesn't always make sense, and that I contradict myself sometimes, and that I ask for one thing one day and it's different the next. And what I'm trying to do actually is be that's okay. I'm communicating and I'm sharing, but it does ultimately have to start from within. I think
So
what happens
keeping
is
that
it can be a
dialogue
hurt.
open.
Yeah, keeping the
Yeah.
dialogue open,
Yeah.
keeping the dialogue open and giving yourself permission for it to not really, for you to still be trying to navigate it within yourself, because it changes as well. What sometimes we need when we're bleeding from our partner can change, but you need to know you need to know yourself before, you can begin to share that with somebody else. And the dialogue is so important, because I've found that my partner and partners in the past have revealed things to me that I also wasn't aware of. I think sometimes when people are really close to us, they can see things that we can't always see because we're in it. And when you have a menstrual cycle, you're so in it, it's like when you have your period, it's hard to even remember how it feels to ovulate, or when you're premenstrual, what that spring energy feels like. And so it's actually really helpful to talk to your partner about how they perceive you in different phases of your menstrual cycle as well, and what they've observed you asking for, or needing, or saying that you're craving, or the energy that you're giving off. Because, say for example, I often feel like in my winter phase that I want a lot of love and attention and hugs and cuddles from Alex, but he'll communicate to me that often my energy is very much like, do not come near me. Like, I want to be on my own, and I want to have like Claire time, and I want to feel that that relationship with myself. And that's true, because that is so important to me when I'm bleeding, is my relationship with myself. And what we've sort of uncovered together is that if I'm not giving that to myself at that time, like I'm not carving that time aside for me to really just be alone and write and pull cards and, just go weird, then I crave it from him, and it's and that's something we've struggled with, because he's like, this doesn't feel like there's a conflict here, like you're asking for something from me, but you're telling me that actually what you want is to be alone. And it can feel so like tender in those moments as well. So something else I've been doing is, after that season has finished, as I'm crossing over into the next phase of my cycle, is to just take a moment to reflect, like what did work for me? When did I really want to spend time with Alex? What did I need from him? What did I want? What did or didn't work? When did I abandon myself in that time as well? And it's such an ongoing process. This one, relating with other people and people that we love. A wonderful woman who's taken a few of my courses has this guide that she has given her partner, and it's this incredible document that she has written out how she feels in each season of her menstrual cycle, the self care that she needs to do for herself at that time, so her partner's aware of that, but also what she needs from him, and how she needs to be loved, and how she can give it back to him as well, like what her capacity for love is at that time too. And I really, I haven't actually done that myself, because I still feel like I'm very much still figuring this out. But they've been together for a really long time, and I loved seeing this document that she's given to him. It's like a guidebook to her and her menstrual cycle and their relationship. And if that was a different relationship, it might be really different, and it might be a different person, because it creates a different dynamic. So I think, just because something I have found in this current relationship that I'm in is that it's actually very different to past relationships I've been in. So I had expectations about how I might like to be loved when I'm ovulating, or or even when I'm premenstrual, how I am in relationship. These are these ideas that I had from my last relationship. This is how I am when I'm premenstrual with my partner, that have actually not been the case in this current relationship. And so I'm relearning it all again and getting to know myself in different phases of my cycle with Alex. And yeah, again, the surrender, letting go of like, I thought that's what worked for me, but actually it's something different now. And so I think being really open to that as well. So yeah, does any of that resonate? Because I feel like I'm very much in this process myself still.
Absolutely, 100%. And it's an attachment to a part of our identity like anything else. So I love that you've mentioned this here, is like that letting go, surrendering that where my cycle was at last month is not this month. Where it was at with a partner in the past is not necessarily how it's going to be in the future. So every cycle, although there are patterns, there is also a sense of a blank slate as well, right?
Yeah, we're moving through our own cycle. We're moving through the seasons of the year. We're moving through other cycles in our life. We're moving through different relationships, work environments, family dynamics. Like we're influenced by so much. And so, that menstrual cycle, if you kind of look at it as if it were like a series of of cycles that are moving in. Our menstrual cycle is this core one within us that we can really get to know very intimately, and it kind of is our core anchor, our core inner cycle. And it's so important to know that and stay attuned to that, but to recognize that around us there are these other cycles we're moving through too, and they will ultimately influence how we experience our menstrual cycle too. Yeah. What about you? How do you communicate what you need in different phases of your cycle with your man?
Well, this is super fresh because we've just moved in together, the two of us, in January. So he's seen me go through this, over the past few years of like getting really in touch with my cycle. But oftentimes there's only been a few occasions that I've actually bled when I've been with him prior to this year. So, even in relationship, we go through different cycles. So I feel like this is a new cycle for us living together. So we're creating a new story, I guess, around that. And he's really now seeing, because he's living with me, he's really noticing day by day the changes and throughout the cycle. But even what I've noticed is also a connection, I guess, here with the love languages, because that's been super powerful in our relationship. So in terms of with the menstrual cycle awareness, like something I do in my winter, how I ask for help, because Matt's main love language is acts of service. So I'll ask, for example, if he could cook dinner, because it's something so tangible and practical that he can be like, yep, sweet, I'll do that. Like, no worries. And it's taken care of. So I feel like at the moment, I'm learning how to almost merge those and like really respect his love language and like what he thrives at to help me, and vice versa.
It's a great example. We've just prompted me to think of an agreement Alex and I have come to, where when I have my period, because normally we have the deal, whoever cooks, the other person cleans up, fine. Yes. But when I have my period, then he will cook and clean up for one or two of those nights. And then when I am ovulating, then I will cook and clean up. And
oh my God, it's biggest luxury. Not
Oh,
having to cook
not
and clean
oh,
is like
honestly, isn't it?
living.
It's like it's such a gift.
Yeah.
It just feels like such a gift to receive that. Like, oh, thank you. It is just so beautiful and so sweet. Um,
Mm.
and I won't. Yeah, I think these, practical things like that, they can make it really playful and fun, can't you? It doesn't have to be
Yeah.
serious or scary to have these conversations. Like, what could be a really fun way that we ritualize my cycle within our relationship in a way that benefits them? I think selling the benefits to
Yeah.
anybody is always a brilliant idea. So it's great to talk about the features of the menstrual cycle, but like, how does it actually benefit somebody else? What's the benefit for them? And one of my clients, her husband calls her ovulation week her rabbit week because she just like
Great.
wants to shag all the time.
I
And
love that you
so
say
when they're
shag also.
yeah,
Short note.
when they're planning holidays, she'll
Yes.
they'll look at her calendar and he's like, okay, so like, when's your rabbit week? Like, I want to be like, let's go away. And she's the same. She's like, of course. Like, I want to go away when I'm feeling turned on and I want to be connected to you. And I don't like, that's the like juicy energy I want to bring to a holiday. And so they look for her rabbit week in the calendar when planning holidays. So, it can be really
Amazing.
fun and playful.
And that
I've got,
language, those little like you know, nicknames or sayings that you have for things, as you said, can make it feel like that lightness and that play to it.
yeah, exactly. That's right. So the seasons might work for some people, but actually maybe you come up with your own language and terminology within your relationship to to talk about where you're at and to be light and playful with it and to make to make it something that can strengthen your relationship, because your partner wants to serve you and they want to serve all parts of you. And the clearer we are on what we need and what feels good and what we really want to do, and then being able to share that with somebody else, even if it does change, even if it comes out in a mess, then like, that's only for the betterment of the relationship.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think asking the question, like, how do you see me in these different phases? Like, let's,
Yes.
being really curious, I think that curiosity, like, how am I to you? Where do I hold back at different times in our relationship? Where do I when am I open? Like, when do you notice me being really open with you? When do you feel like I close off? And having those questions, as well, and being able to just see each other in that way, because there's such a beautiful union that can, that sense of union that can occur when we can move throughout the menstrual cycle. And often, the truth is the weeks that I think we struggle as women a lot in relating is certainly premenstrually and when we're bleeding. And even if they're the 2 weeks that you start with, getting to know, like, how, often I hear from people, how can I not kill my husband on day 25? Like, I want to like leave him, divorce him, kill him, like every week of every cycle. Like, how can I not do that? Because I love him and I don't want to do that, like how do I make this relationship work? Because I'm horrible in that week, and it's often when there's this guilt of like, oh, I'm such an like asshole in that week. How can I not be? And this is where, we have to be so gentle with ourselves. Ask these questions. What do I really need and want and crave in that week? What is it that I'm closing myself off to? Like, what would feel amazing for me to receive in that week? And then having the conversation, like, how is it for you when I act, when I'm acting like this, or when I'm in this space? Like, how can we come together, or how maybe do we need to actually give each other more space? That's something that I've found in this relationship, is that when I'm premenstrual or when I'm bleeding, it's a brilliant time actually for us to have some time apart because we live in a one-bedroom house in London and there isn't a great deal of room and space, and so actually even sleeping, I really like sleeping alone when I'm bleeding. So sleeping out on the sofa for a couple of nights is actually a lovely way for me to have the space that I do really want and crave, and also for Alex to have more space for himself, or for me to say, like, this is the week that I'm bleeding. If you want to go out and like be out with your mates,
Yeah.
I mean, at any time he's free to do that, of course, but like that's the time that would be a really great time for you to go and do that, because I actually would really love the house to myself for a couple of and really like giving that other person then more space at that time as well, even when it feels, and this is where my work is right now, is like even when it feels really tended to do that, because there's also that part of me that's just like, love me, like just hold me.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's like, oh no, I really need to hold myself here actually, like what the love that I really need. And for me personally, when I'm bleeding, is actually it needs to come from within, and when it comes from within, then I'm overflowing with it and I just feel so held in it. When I try to find it from external sources when I'm bleeding, it's never enough, is what I'm learning right now. So, giving each other space as well when that, it's so healthy to be able to do that. There might just be days and weeks where you just really don't spend a lot of time together, and that's perfectly okay.
I love that you have spoken about this, and I love the questions you're suggesting around asking a partner, how is it for you to experience me during the menstrual cycle? Because there are things that, for example, Matt has said to me that like I hadn't clicked yet within myself, or there's like patterns that he's reflected back to me, and I'm like, oh my gosh, yes. And I think around this whole discussion that's very on trend of late around like masculine and feminine, and there's a lot of work out there that supports women are so intuitive, which 100% they are, and the menstrual cycle is like an epitome of that connection and that intuitive ability that can be nurtured through that. Men or people with a masculine essence are intuitive as well, incredibly intuitive, is what I have also noticed.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that as for those of us who have a menstrual cycle, we can bring other people on that journey with us, and I would love to see a world where we do live more in rhythm with the woman in the family, and if we have children, that our children come on that rhythm with us as well, and that the family unit can be actually living more in harmony with the woman's natural cycle. And I do believe that as the if we're in a relationship with somebody with a feminine essence and a masculine essence, and the person with the masculine essence doesn't have a menstrual cycle, that actually they strengthen their feminine energy and their intuitive energy by just like by osmosis, like by being in the energy and paying attention and asking like, well, where are you now? And just being aware, for them just being aware of this rhythm. It's helpful for all of us. We live on a planet that is deeply suffering right now because we've forgotten what it means to live cyclically. We're living in a very linear society, and we're obsessed with consumption, and there's no time for rest or renewal. And actually, it's healing for all of us, those with a masculine essence, those without a menstrual cycle, to pay attention to any sort of cycle, to any rhythm, but certainly the rhythm that exists within the people that we love, and that we're living with as well. It's very healing, I think, for anybody to start to pay attention to that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So good. Yeah.
So good.
Yeah.
Thank
so
you.
Good.
Where
The last thing I'll say on that when it comes to benefits is sex. I mean,
yes,
the sex.
this is what I would love to move into.
like the sex is really important in any relationship, isn't it? And as our sexual energy changes week to week,
Mm-hmm.
um, often in very profound ways, sometimes subtle, and we're all really different. This is really big in relationships. And again, selling the benefits of it. The rabbit week, if you know when your rabbit weeks are, your rabbit days, like yeah, working them, using them to really juice up your relationship.
Absolutely. And your in Adore Your Cycle, you speak to the archetypes present during each of the seasons. So in winter, the crone; in spring, the maiden energy; summer, this mothering energy; in autumn, the wild woman. I'd love to just touch on here, and I know time's getting on, so we may finish off with this. But do you find that the sort of the flavor or your preferences for the type of sex, and whether that's solo or with a partner, do you find there's a rhythm with that archetype or that season?
Yeah, cool. I like the archetypes in this here. I mean, short answer is yes. There definitely is. So I find that um, while I notice, yeah, the way I relate with other people does seem to change quite a bit. My cycle is always changing, and things are changing within it. If I think about it, my sexual energy within myself hasn't changed that much over the last few years. It changes every week, but actually, like it's very familiar to me, the rhythm of my sexual energy.
Mm-hmm.
So if we'll just walk through the cycle, for me, when I have my period, and it's, I guess, yeah, more of that crone energy. Like I said, it's very much about being connected to myself at that time. Even when I think it's about getting love externally, often it is most replenishing when it comes from within. And so self-pleasure just is, for me, the only kind of sexual energy that I'm really up for. I think if you're somebody who loves period sex, and go for it. I don't. So I actually just really prefer to self pleasure and be with my own sexual energy. But it really peaks there. Like for me, when I have my period, it's a peak, definitely. I think I have two peaks in my sexual energy. One's when I'm bleeding, and the other one's when I'm ovulating. But they're very different. Like when I have that peak when I'm bleeding, it's again, it's like just masturbating, self-pleasure, like having orgasms, but on my own. When I'm ovulating and I have that peak in sexual energy, that's when I'm like, that is when I'm like, I need to be intimate with somebody else. Like that's when I'm like, I need to feel like a physical like penetration, and I need it
Yeah.
from somebody else. It's like it's so
It's
it's
visceral.
so primal. It is, and it
Yeah.
is, and it makes sense if we think about this from an evolutionary perspective. It makes sense. That's when we're fertile, and
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, they're very different. And so that mothering energy, I guess, if we looked at the summer phase, I also think about this time as like the slut archetype. This is
Yeah.
definitely like the mother slut energy in the summer. And oh God, I really feel it. It can be very nurturing, like I can be making love, and it's very like nurturing, loving energy. And I'm very generous. Like that's when I'll be like giving massages, and I'm like, like I'm really generous sexually, really, really generous, and very, yeah, juicy and wet. And then there's very much that slut archetype for me as well. Then like I just cannot get enough basically for that week. It's
Yes.
like hungry. So they are definitely like they're so distinct. Again, they're both these peaks, but they're very distinctive, different sexual energies for me. If we were to
Mm.
look at the spring to autumn, that sort of opposite side of the cycle, the maiden, that playful, innocent maiden energy, I really do resonate with that in the pre-ovulatory weeks sexually. My sexual energy here is It is more playful. It's a little more, it's definitely more reserved than I am in my summer. I can
Mm,
feel like there's almost like a bashfulness, I think. Like I feel like I'm kind of re-entering, like my sexual energy has reset in my winter, and because I haven't been intimate with Alex for about a week because I just,
mm.
like I said, I don't like it. Um, by the time I hit my spring, I'm like, oh, okay, like are we going to reconnect again? And it kind of feels like quite innocent and a
It's
bit
like,
like,
how does
oh,
this work? Like, yeah.
yeah, like,
There's like a little
hi.
vulnerability in it, I feel, in
Yeah,
that spring.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, perfect word. It is. It's like this vulnerability. Like I can feel my sexual energy growing, and and it arcs back to that time in our lives when we were in our teen years and we were feeling this sexual energy, but like, what do you do with it? And like that, oh God, like how do I share this with somebody else? So it is, yeah, it is more vulnerable. It is more vulnerable. I mean, I'm day 10 today and I'm already feeling more grounded in it. I think by day
Mm.
10, okay, I feel more grounded in my sexual energy now, and that feels really good. But certainly for the last few days, I think, yeah, it does. There's like a little like, oh gosh, yeah, you gotta,
Like that
cherish.
crossover sort of
Yeah,
phase. Yeah.
definitely. Really like, yeah, be sweet with yourself. It is like a virgin energy,
Mm.
be with yourself as if it is the first time that you've had sex. If you're having sex again after your menstruation, you might not want to go in for like really hard, fast, like full on sex right away. Maybe it is actually better for you to take it more gently and slowly in your
Mm.
spring and again to communicate that if that feels right for you. Um, so yeah, here I definitely feel the maiden energy then, and then we move into the summer where I'm just like totally up for it. And by autumn, yeah, this is a hit or a miss for me. Sometimes in my
Mm.
autumn, I really love connecting sexually because one, I'm not fertile anymore, and I'm not in the I'm not planning to conceive right now at this point in my life. So it is in the back of my mind sometimes, when we're even doing all the right things and practicing safe sex, but still I'm like, oh, I could actually become pregnant right now, and that's not on the cards. There is a freedom actually that comes in that premenstrual week when I know for sure
Mm.
that I'm not fertile, and Alex is free to come inside me if he wants to, and that feels amazing, and I love that, and I love there is like a freedom and that wild woman. Like I don't feel as generous as I did that previous week, but that doesn't mean the sex isn't still incredible and amazing. In fact, it can be quite like more raw, I think,
Mm.
and that vulnerability piece that was there in the spring is back, but it's less about kind of vulnerable and coming out of my skin or my cave there, or feeling like I've got thin skin, which I can sometimes feel in my spring. It's much more like what it is wild. It can just be a bit more, yeah, raw and quite intense actually.
It's
And
more of a like what I'm sensing as you're speaking, and from my
mm,
experience, it's like, where are we gonna go? Not
mm,
what are we gonna do in terms of like the spring of like, are we gonna do this, or like
mm.
what's
Yeah,
happening here? It's
yeah,
like Wild Woman is like, well, where do you want to go? Like this could go anywhere, and
definitely.
I think maybe that's the vulnerability.
I think I'm definitely more open to experimenting in
Mm,
my both my summer and my autumn.
yeah.
And if I have been really open in my summer and we have like been quite creative or like tried something new or different, that's the best time for me to do that then because I have more
Yes.
resilience. But then I kind of carry that confidence and energy into my autumn, and it is also less about climaxing, I think, in my autumn as well. It's less about like needing to have like an orgasm, and it can be a little bit more exploratory and just Yeah, but then other times it's like, oh, it's the last thing that I feel like doing. Sometimes it feels like the best remedy for premenstrual symptoms is like having an orgasm and having that release and just like that like primal wild connection
Mm.
feels great. And then other times actually I don't really feel like it and I much prefer to just cuddle and kiss and be sweet and intimate with each other without, the need for sex. So my autumn is where it does shift and change. And definitely in the last couple of days of my cycle, as I'm getting really close to bleeding, I get quite turned on then. That is when I definitely feel like sex feels almost like there's a hole in my chest then that I want to fill with sex. And sometimes I can do that on my own and I can just self pleasure, and that really helps me to feel like a sense of union within myself, because I feel that bleed coming and I feel that separation from the material world, and I'm like, oh God, like where am I, like, it's
Mm-hmm.
almost here. And it can feel like, my mentor Alexandra calls it the void. It can feel like this
Yes.
void hole just before you bleed. And sex is, I definitely use it as a way to kind of reconnect with myself, whether that is alone or whether it is with my partner. But it is very powerful in those last couple of days, for
Mm.
sure. It's more of that sacred sexual union then than at any other time for me.
Mm. Mm.
Mm.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for your openness in sharing this as well. Really,
Mm.
really appreciate it.
Mm. Oh, my pleasure. I think that, I think physically, any physical changes that we can notice within ourselves are, I think, often the easiest way to start to pay attention to the menstrual cycle, because they
Mm.
often, are the most obvious. And sexual energy is definitely one of those. It's
Yeah.
an easy way to begin to notice these changes, because it is often quite profound once we start to pay attention. It's like, oh, that does actually change quite a lot. The things that I want, the things that I crave, the things that I don't want, where my boundaries are, how they shift and change in different points in my menstrual cycle. It is a really good entry point, I think, for somebody who's curious about this work and also about connecting with their partner on this work.
Absolutely. And so, if we could just finish on this here, in your line of work and in your community, in terms of same sex relationships, have you come across any wonderful tips you could offer to our listeners that may be navigating sort of two cycles
Mm.
simultaneously?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, we often hear the idea that people sync up when they live together. I think more often than not, I've heard from women in same-sex relationships that they don't sync up, or that they haven't. And there's no science to prove that we do, we even do sync up, even though it does sometimes seem to happen. So
Yeah.
often, you will be experiencing probably um, two different menstrual cycles. And because our cycles change all of the time anyway, it's unlikely that even if there is a sort of syncing, that will continue on anyway. So it is fair to expect that you might be navigating different cycles at different times. And again, this open dialogue is so important. Knowing, like, for example, if you're both in your spring, how is that for you? Or when your partner is menstruating and you're in your summer, how can you really, like, how wonderful actually is, to be able to take care of your partner at that time. If you know that you both have vulnerability in your autumn, say for feeling like abandoned or feeling like any trauma resurfacing, or it's a very sensitive
Mm.
time for the two of you, that's something to really be mindful of if you're both going into your autumn phase together. I can just see these circles just playing inside
It's
each
an
other.
inception.
Yeah, exactly. And this is where period tracking apps, this is where cycle calendars that are stuck on the fridge, like this is where just being
Yes.
as open as possible with each other is so important. And that's something I haven't mentioned as well, is sharing your period tracking app with your partner, or marking out. I have marked on the calendar in our kitchen my cycle and where I am. So at any time Alex can check his phone, or he can look at the calendar and he can see where I am. Um,
Without
that's
having to ask the question,
without having to ask the
are you
question,
on your period?
Yes, exactly. Like he knows, he always knows exactly where I am. Always. He
Yeah,
always knows.
that's awesome.
And yeah, and it's something, it's a conversation I'd love to have. Maybe him and I can come back on the podcast together and we can have a
Oh my
conversation
gosh.
because he would, yeah,
Is he there?
he's
Can
so,
you bring... No.
he's in the
Bring him
shower.
out.
Yeah, bring him out. He'd love that. Put on the spot. But I certainly think, for those in same-sex relationships, just having those cycles really clearly and knowing also, again, like how can you make this playful and fun? Where are your brilliant crossover points that you can get excited about? Like, oh, amazing. We're both going to be in our summer here. Like, how brilliant. Or you're going to be in your summer and I'm going to be in my winter. So, can you take on some more responsibilities around the house and just
the cook and
have
clean.
things the cook and clean switch over. Yeah, exactly.
I love that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I do think that there's women taking care of women when they're bleeding, in a relationship or not is so beautiful. And I love knowing where my girlfriends are. I have them all on my Clue app. I know where they are. Like when I'm working with somebody, I mean, Mandy, when you and I were doing the retreat in Australia last year, like, I knew where you were going to be. You knew where I was. Every day we were asking like where people were in their menstrual cycle. I always know where my clients are. I know, I want to know where the women in my life, where they are in their menstrual cycle, because it helps me, again, to be able to serve them in a really powerful way.
Absolutely. Well, Claire, I can't thank you enough. You have just been so generous with your wisdom today and your openness to share with me and my community. I honestly can't thank you enough. It's above and beyond, really.
Oh, it's been a joy as always speaking with you, and thank you for having me. And I absolutely love what you're creating here on the podcast, and just want to say how important it is what you're doing. And I love the energy you bring to it. You make things that can often feel quite serious or overwhelming just fun and light and accessible, and I really admire that about you.
Thank you so much. And I guess I'd just love to ask you, to let my listeners know where they can find out more about you and your work.
So you can pop over to my website, thisislifeblood.com, and on my website you can find information about how to work with me one-on-one, or take one of my courses, or download my ebook, Adore Your Cycle. There's plenty of blog posts and various free resources to begin to start charting your cycle on there as well. Otherwise on Instagram I am at _ClaireBaker_, and I like to share where I'm on, like what cycle day I'm on and how I'm taking care of myself and what's going on for me over there, and love to hear from everybody else as well, where everyone else is at too. So Instagram is definitely my number one social media choice. Otherwise, website.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Claire.
Thanks, Mandy.